Air travel is one of the safest ways to travel, but when something goes wrong, the results can be devastating. Some crashes leave behind mysteries, while others reveal horrifying details of what happened in the final moments. In this video, we'll look at 5 of the most disturbing plane crash deaths of all time, real stories of passengers and crew who faced unthinkable horror in the sky. On March 24, 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525 took off from Barcelona, Spain, bound for Dusseldorf, Germany. It was a routine 2-hour flight carrying 150 passengers and crew. Among them was 37-year-old Marina Bandres, a film editor from Manchester, traveling with her 7-month-old son, Julian. She had attended a family funeral in Spain and was now returning home. Marina was a warm and well-loved member of her community. Her husband, Pavel Prach, had been eagerly waiting for her and their son's return, but tragically, that never happened. The flight progressed normally, reaching a cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. At 9:30 a.m. GMT, the pilots made their final communication with air traffic control. Soon after, Captain Patrick Sondenheimer left the cockpit for a short break, leaving co-pilot Andreas Lubitz in control. Moments later, Lubitz adjusted the plane's altitude, initiating a rapid descent toward the French Alps. Air traffic controllers immediately noticed the drop and attempted to contact the aircraft, but there was no response. Other pilots in the area also tried reaching out, but the cockpit remained silent. Passengers, unaware of the unfolding crisis, continued their journey, oblivious to the danger ahead. The captain quickly realized something was wrong. He rushed back and tried to open the cockpit door, but it was locked. Desperate, he banged on the door, shouting for Lubitz to let him in, but there was no answer. As recorded in the black box, the captain even tried breaking the door down, but nothing worked. Inside the cockpit, Lubitz remained calm, breathing steadily as he maintained the plane's rapid descent. Alarms blared. Terrain, pull up. But the warnings were ignored. At 9:41 a.m., the Airbus A320 crashed into the mountains at 700 kilometers per hour, or 430 miles per hour. The impact was devastating. No one survived. Rescue teams arrived to find the wreckage scattered across the mountainside. Investigators soon recovered the black box, which revealed the chilling details of what had happened. Further inquiries uncovered Lubitz's history of severe mental health struggles. He had been diagnosed with various psychological conditions, including deep emotional distress. Just weeks before the crash, he had been advised against flying, but concealed his condition from his employer. He had also researched plane crashes and methods to override cockpit security systems. Authorities found no external motives behind the tragedy. Instead, it appeared that Lubitz had been struggling with personal fears, particularly about his career and health. His belief that he might lose his ability to fly had deeply affected him, leading to his devastating decision. For the families of the victims, the grief was immeasurable. Marina and Julian were just 2 of the 150 lives lost, each with their own stories, dreams, and loved ones left behind. In response to the tragedy, airlines worldwide implemented stricter cockpit policies, ensuring at least 2 crew members are always present. This change has helped improve flight safety, but for those who lost family and friends that day, it came too late. The memory of Germanwings Flight 9525 remains a painful chapter in aviation history, a reminder of the importance of vigilance and mental health awareness in high-responsibility professions. On October 31, 2015, Metrojet Flight 9268 took off from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, bound for St. Petersburg, Russia. It was a routine flight, carrying 224 passengers, mostly Russian tourists returning home. Among them was 10-month-old Darina Gromova, traveling with her parents. Tragically, none of the passengers or crew would make it home. Just 23 minutes after takeoff, the Airbus A321 suddenly lost contact with air traffic control. The plane, cruising at 33,000 feet, broke apart mid-air and crashed over Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Wreckage was scattered across a 20-square-kilometer area, leaving no survivors. The incident became one of the deadliest disasters in Russian aviation history. As investigators searched for answers, they found Darina's body 21 miles from the main crash site. This suggested that the explosion occurred much earlier in the flight than initially believed. Her location raised new concerns about how and when the plane broke apart. Attention soon turned to the possibility of an explosive device. Investigators found small holes in the fuselage with edges bent inward, a sign of an internal blast. Recordings from the plane's black boxes captured unusual noises moments before the aircraft disintegrated. These findings pointed to an intentional act rather than mechanical failure. Experts theorize that the device could have been smuggled in through luggage, possibly by an airport worker or a passenger who bypassed security. There were concerns about security lapses at Sharm el-Sheikh Airport, raising questions about how such an attack was possible. A few days later, a terrorist organization claimed responsibility for the disaster, stating it was in retaliation for Russia's military actions in Syria. Investigators later confirmed that traces of foreign explosives were found in the debris supporting this claim. The passengers on board were mostly families enjoying a vacation before heading home. Among them were Darina and her parents, Tatiana and Alexei Gromov. Tatiana, who had been on maternity leave, frequently shared updates on social media. Just before their return flight, she posted a photo of Darina standing at an airport window, captioning it "main passenger." The image, once an innocent memory, became a haunting symbol of the tragedy. Darina's grandmother, Elena Gromova, later revealed that she had offered to care for the child while the couple traveled, but they wanted to share the vacation as a family. Their trip was meant to be a joyful escape, but it ended in heartbreak. As the investigation continued, Russian officials confirmed that an explosive device was the likely cause. The revelation sent shockwaves through the country. Families grieved, and the world watched as details of the disaster unfolded. The loss of Darina and her parents struck an emotional chord with the public. Her photo spread widely, capturing the innocence lost that day. She became the face of the tragedy, a reminder of the devastating consequences of such attacks. In the months following the disaster, efforts were made to honor Darina's memory. A petition called for a statue of her to be placed at St. Petersburg's Pulkovo Airport, where the family had departed. The proposed sculpture depicted Darina holding a toy airplane, symbolizing the tragic loss. Over 160,000 people signed in support, and renowned sculptor Zurab Tsereteli agreed to create it for free. However, airport officials expressed concerns that the statue might be too distressing for travelers. While discussions about its location continued, the petition remained a strong statement of remembrance. Despite thorough investigations, key details remain unclear. The exact method used to plant the device and potential security failures have never been fully explained. What is certain is that the crash left lasting pain for the victims' families and the world. Darina's final photo at the airport window remains a powerful image, symbolizing the lives lost. While nothing can undo the tragedy, her memory endures, reminding us of the impact such events have on innocent lives. On December 29, 2024, Jeju Air Flight 7C-2216 was en route from Bangkok to Muan International Airport in South Korea. The Boeing 737-800 carried 181 people, including families returning from holiday trips, tourists, and foreign passengers. What was supposed to be a routine flight home ended in one of South Korea's worst air disasters. Many passengers had spent the previous week in Thailand, enjoying vacations and visiting loved ones. Among them were Kang Ko, a 43-year-old PR officer for the Kia Tigers baseball team, his wife Jin Lee Seon, 37, and their 3-year-old son, Go Mo. It was their first family trip abroad, and they had been sharing pictures of their adventures. In one of the last images, their son held his first passport with excitement, unaware of the tragedy ahead. As the aircraft approached Muan International Airport, it encountered a flock of birds. The right engine was struck, leading to a failure. Witnesses said the plane tried to climb but couldn't regain altitude. Instead, it veered off course and attempted a landing from an unintended direction. Passengers inside were unaware of the full extent of the situation. One traveler messaged a family member saying, "A bird got stuck in the wing and we can't land." Moments later, another message followed. "Should I say my last words?" It was the final communication before disaster struck. The landing gear failed to deploy, causing the aircraft to skid down the runway before crashing into a concrete barrier. The impact triggered a massive explosion, engulfing the plane in flames. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but the damage was catastrophic. Nearly all of the 181 passengers and crew lost their lives. Only 2 cabin crew members survived, though both were critically injured. Among the victims was young Go Mo, whose first international trip ended in heartbreak. His parents, Kang Ko and Jin Lee Seon, also did not survive. The photos they had shared just hours earlier now served as a painful reminder of their final moments together. Another passenger, 22-year-old Sirathan Chow from Thailand, had been on her way to South Korea to start a new life. She had dreamed of becoming an air hostess and was excited to reunite with her mother, who lived in Korea. Her mother had been waiting at the airport when she saw the news of the crash. Overcome with grief, she struggled to accept the reality that her daughter was gone. Entire families perished in the disaster. A man in his 60s lost his daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren. In the village of Yonggwang, where many victims lived, the community was in deep mourning. Among them was Mr. Bae, a 79-year-old who had traveled to Thailand for his 80th birthday. He was returning home with his wife, children, and grandchildren, but none of them survived. The only remaining family member was one of his daughter's husbands, left to grieve alone. The village of Yonggwang was overwhelmed with sorrow. Neighbors described the heartbreak of seeing a family's pet dog waiting for its owners to return, pacing by the door and looking up the road. No one could explain to the loyal pet that its family was never coming home. For the surviving relatives, the grief was unbearable. One of them, who had lost his wife and 3 children, expressed his devastation, saying, "We should have gone together." The aftermath of the crash was difficult for authorities and families alike. The wreckage was still being examined, and many victims' remains were unrecognizable. Only 5 bodies had been identified, while the rest awaited forensic testing. At the airport, grieving families gathered, desperate for answers. Some even set up temporary shelters as they waited for news. Jeju Air issued condolences and promised support to the families, but no words could ease their pain. The victims had been returning from a time of celebration, looking forward to the future. Instead, they became part of a tragedy that left an entire nation in mourning. Investigators continued to examine what went wrong, focusing on the bird strike and the aircraft's mechanical failure. But for those who lost their loved ones, no investigation can fill the emptiness left behind. The crash of Jeju Air Flight 7C2216 was a devastating loss of life, taking away parents, children, and dreamers in an instant. Their stories will not be forgotten, and for their families, life will never be the same again. It was December 25th, 2024. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 and Embraer 190 was on its way from Baku, Azerbaijan to Grozny, Russia. The aircraft carried 67 people, 62 passengers and 5 crew members. What should have been a routine flight turned into a catastrophe, leaving 38 dead and 29 survivors. What happened that day involved confusion, desperation, and a tragic turn of events that would later point to an external attack. The flight departed from Baku on schedule that morning. The weather was not ideal, but still safe for flying. For the first 40 minutes, everything seemed normal as the plane cruised at over 30,000 feet. The pilots, Captain Igor Kshniakin and co-pilot Alexander Kalyaninov, were experienced, and the flight crew, including Chief Flight Attendant Hokuma Aliyeva, was ensuring the journey remained smooth. As the plane neared Russian airspace, a critical issue arose. Its GPS navigation system stopped working. Experts later suggested this was due to Russian military jamming in the area, a common practice in regions experiencing political tension. Without GPS, the pilots had to rely on alternative methods to navigate. Despite this, Russian air traffic control cleared the plane to land in Grozny. However, thick fog made landing impossible. The pilots attempted to land twice but had to abort due to poor visibility. With conditions worsening, they decided to return to Baku. Then disaster struck. Around 81 minutes into the flight, a loud explosion shook the plane. Passengers and crew members panicked as shrapnel tore through the fuselage. Flight attendant Aiden Rahimli recalled oxygen masks dropping automatically. Moments later, a second explosion followed. Flight attendant Zulfugar Asadov was struck in the arm by debris, but continued assisting passengers. The pilots immediately declared an emergency and tried to regain control of the aircraft. At first, they believed the damage might have been caused by a bird strike, but as the situation worsened, it became clear this was something much more serious. With the plane's systems failing, they decided to head toward Kazakhstan for an emergency landing. As the aircraft crossed the Caspian Sea toward Aktau, Kazakhstan, it became increasingly unstable. Altitude and speed fluctuated erratically, making control difficult. The crew attempted to land at Aktau International Airport, but failed on the first approach. Then the worst happened. At 10:30 a.m., just 3 kilometers from the runway, the right wing struck the ground. The plane tumbled, broke apart, and caught fire. Thick black smoke filled the air as rescuers rushed to the scene. The crash site was chaotic. Emergency responders worked to pull survivors from the wreckage. Some passengers, bloodied and severely injured, managed to crawl out of the debris. The fuselage was torn apart, with plane fragments scattered across the field. Flames raged as firefighters fought to contain them. One piece of footage captured a woman crying for help as rescuers struggled to reach her. Of the 67 people on board, 38 lost their lives, including both pilots and a flight attendant. Chief Flight Attendant Hokuma Aliyeva was among them. She had remained calm, reassuring passengers in the final moments. Her last words over the intercom were, "Everything will be fine." Tragically, it wasn't. Her family later described her as a dedicated professional who took pride in her work. Though 29 people survived, many suffered severe injuries, including burns and broken bones. 2 children were among the survivors, but the ordeal left them and others deeply traumatized. As investigators examined the crash, disturbing evidence emerged. Missile fragments were found at the site, raising suspicions that the plane had been hit by a surface-to-air missile. Experts believed it was likely fired from a Panzer S-1 defense system, which was active in the region. Survivors had reported hearing multiple explosions before the plane lost control. At first, Russian officials denied any involvement. However, after mounting international pressure, the Kremlin issued an apology for what they called a tragic incident. President Vladimir Putin expressed condolences but did not confirm that a Russian defense system was responsible. The incident caused diplomatic tensions and the investigation continued. In the days that followed, survivors and families of the victims demanded answers. Azerbaijan Airlines pledged to cooperate fully and provide support to those affected. Eventually, the investigation confirmed external interference as the cause of the crash, pointing to a missile strike as the likely reason for the disaster. For the families of the 38 victims and the 29 survivors, the events of that Christmas day left permanent scars. Though the wreckage was cleared and some questions were answered, the pain remained. The tragedy was a harsh reminder of the risks of flying in regions with ongoing conflicts, where unseen dangers can change lives in an instant. It was the morning of September 27, 2024, in Provo, Utah. The skies were clear, and the weather was favorable as a Cirrus SR-22 aircraft approached Provo Airport. On board were 43-year-old pilot Michael Hiram Cox from St. George, Utah, and his passenger, 46-year-old Mark Andrew Johnson, a father of 6 from Washington City. They had taken off from St. George earlier that day, expecting a smooth landing in Provo. At around 10 a.m., the plane was cleared to land. Everything seemed normal, until Cox suddenly decided to perform a go-around. This maneuver is used when a pilot feels that landing is unsafe, often due to unstable approach or unexpected conditions. However, executing it incorrectly can lead to serious consequences. As Cox attempted to climb again, the plane lost speed and stalled. Witnesses on the ground saw the aircraft dip sharply before spiraling out of control. Moments later, it crashed into Utah Lake just north of Provo. The impact was violent and the wreckage quickly sank, trapping both men underwater. Nearby boaters saw the crash and immediately called 911. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, there were no signs of life. The lake's murky waters made it difficult to locate the wreckage, and divers struggled with limited visibility. Authorities, including the Utah County Sheriff's Department, Provo Police and Fire Departments, and the Utah Highway Patrol dive team, launched a full-scale search. Teams used sonar equipment and specialized water rescue tools, but conditions remained challenging. Utah Lake's muddy water made it nearly impossible to see beyond a few inches. Sergeant Garrett Dutson of the Utah County Sheriff's Office described the difficulty, saying, "Even in daylight, if you went in the water, you wouldn't be able to see your hand in front of you." The search stretched for hours, with divers working carefully to locate the plane. By late afternoon, the bodies of Cox and Johnson had not yet been found. At one point, a barge was brought in to help lift the fuselage closer to the surface. The engine had been buried about 3 feet into the lake bed, making recovery even more difficult. Around 8:30 p.m., after nearly 10 hours of searching, divers finally located the wreckage and found both men inside the submerged aircraft. Their recovery was a heartbreaking moment for everyone involved in the operation. News of the crash spread quickly, leaving families and friends in shock. Cox was known as an experienced pilot and a devoted family man. Johnson, also a loving father to 6 children, was deeply respected in his community. Their unexpected loss left their loved ones devastated. Investigators began working to determine what had gone wrong. They confirmed that Cox had been cleared to land at Provo Airport, but the reason for the go-around remained unknown. While the crash was clearly catastrophic, key details, such as Cox's final communication with air traffic control, were still under review. Authorities, including federal investigators, continued analyzing the wreckage to piece together the final moments of the flight. The impact had been severe, with the engine deeply embedded in the lake bed. The exact cause of the accident remained uncertain, but it was evident that the combination of a go-around, loss of speed, and stall had led to the fatal crash. As the investigation continued, the families of Cox and Johnson were left mourning their sudden and tragic loss. Cox's family released a heartfelt statement describing him as a loving husband and father who lived life to the fullest. Johnson's loved ones also expressed their grief, remembering him as a man who always put his family first. The crash at Utah Lake was an unexpected and devastating event that left a lasting impact on the victims' families and their community. Though investigators worked to determine the cause, nothing could undo the tragedy that had unfolded that day.